I'm constantly in a state of excitement with the guests I manage to get on my podcast, and this next artist is no exception to that rule. This album is absolutely mind-blowing. I don't know where this guy's been hiding in my life, but I'm quite pleased I found him now, because the album Crown is outstanding. It's just a staggering piece of work. So I'm very, very, very excited and pleased to introduce King Mas. Mas, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Accept yourself.
It is a real pleasure. My first question to you is, where the fuck have you been hiding? Because this album, literally, I am like, oh my. Me and my girlfriend sat and listened to this album, and like our jaws were just on the floor throughout the whole thing. This is something else, Crown. It is absolutely staggering. I'm actually quite often I'm kind of lost words for it, really. It is the most overarchingly broad mix of music. We have got a constant reggae influence through some of the tracks with the bubble pattern going on. You go into kind of neo soul, which was screaming a bit of Erykah Badu at me. Then you move into kind of Maxwell territory. There's a constant Calypso influence throughout it. We've got dancehall banger. For you, I mean, it's such an expansive project. Where was the motivation for such an eclectic album? Where did this come from?
Well, the central theme, the Crown theme, that song is the sort of the crux of everything else that happened around it. And that song came to me about 4 years ago, just looking at some of the issues that face the nation at the moment. And when you look at a lot of the social decay or the moral decay that's taking place in society, especially among the youth, they want to blame it on a lot of things, but I think the ultimate factor is what happens in the home. And when the homes are disjointed, when masculine and feminine energy cannot dwell together in peace and in balance, it creates a situation in which the children are vulnerable to all manner of influences. And then when they go off the rails, we want to pathologize them, we want to institutionalize them, we want to stigmatize them, when the key factor, as I perceive it, is the breakdown of the family structure. And so, as a practitioner of music, from the perspective that I practice it as, a sort of scientist within the music, and looking at the healing properties of what music can do, my endeavor was to attempt, even in a small way, to repair some of the damage. Speaking as a man, because we're not perfect, and nobody is. But speaking from a masculine perspective, I wanted to do all I could to sort of heal that broken bond that has happened, because it's really not, unfortunately, when you listen to the zeitgeist in the music and in the culture right now. I'm in the US, I'm born and raised in the US, I'm in this space, and it's not cool to be in love. Yeah. It's not cool to talk about love, it's not cool to talk about commitment, it's not cool to talk about building families, but the family is the basic unit of the village, and the village is the basic unit of the nation. So if we're going to repair the nation at large, we have to start at home with the family, and that was the real motivation behind the Crown overall.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you on that, and I mean that kind of message and that feeling comes throughout the album. As you say, Crown. I mean, Crown it's a beautiful track. It's absolutely moving, and you do a brilliant kind of dub remix of it at the end of the album as well. It's a beautiful track, but you get that message throughout it. I mean, it's a very conscious album, from tracks like Round and Round to Militant Step. You're talking about capitalism, the effects of it. As you say, you're talking about the breakdown of society. But I'll come back to that later, because I want to sort of probe the conscious elements and the political and social messages more. But just to talk about the music briefly, as I said, it's an overarching, eclectic album. It is absolutely stunning. The different kind of music and the influences and the intricacies of it as well. Tracks like Crush, for example, it's got an almost kind of Afrobeat wind. I'm sure I'm hearing a Hammond organ in the background. And then if you go on to Queen, there's obvious Calypso influences as well, from the way you've constructed the vocal harmonies on the album, in my opinion. Where does... Oh, I have to say, I'm sorry, I have to say, you're such a singer as well. I mean... sorry, listeners, but I really am excited to be talking to this guy. I could probably chat to him for hours. You're such an amazing singer, but then you're an amazing sing-jay as well. You're also then an amazing rapper. Where did you first find out you could do all this? Because it's stunning. It really is amazing.
Singing in particular is is inborn. I come from a lineage of griots, of musicians,
Yeah,
of
because your dad was
storytellers.
a Calypso artist, wasn't he?
Yes, he's a Calypso king from the island of Montserrat, a former island-wide champion. And so is his uncle, Everton Reality Weeks, who's responsible for one of the biggest songs that the Caribbean culture has ever contributed to the global culture. Me heart on fire, me soul on fire, feeling hot, hot, hot. That is the lineage from which I descend.
Wow.
So with that being the case, I feel it's an inborn thing. And I really can't remember a point where I wasn't singing. Even before I have memories of really singing or doing anything, I'm told from people who knew me as a toddler that I was just singing from that time. I've always been that way. So it's an ancestral tradition that I just inherited.
And the music writing then, how far back does that stretch?
Probably as far as the age of 12, but I've always been, I have to give credit really to my mother, because my mother worked in early childhood education.
Okay.
She's basically runs a daycare, and I was a part of the first group of children. She felt very guilty about I'm a second born, and when she had my elder sister and had to give her to someone in order to go back to work, she felt extremely guilty. She didn't like the separation, and when I was born, she made a decision and said, no, I can no longer do this. So she established that business, and 31 years later, she's still doing it. And I can say that the head start or the jump start I had in my education is through having my mother as my first teacher.
Okay.
So she really, in our household, literacy and education are highly emphasized. And so my sort of vocabulary and the way that I can weave words, I have to largely credit her, and also the musical influences that sort of color my work, especially coming from the Calypso perspective, because when you listen to Calypso music, it's a lot of storytelling, especially the early, even up to now, but, of course I was raised largely on, Sparrow and Arrow and Lord Kitchener and all of them. So weaving and telling stories and narratives, every song with them, it was like a movie, it's a whole movie in itself. And so when I write a song, I sort of utilize that formula.
No, it shines through in the album, absolutely. I as I say, I was getting all sorts throughout listening to Crown. There's sort of tinges of Maxwell about some of the tracks, especially Crown put me in mind of a bit of Maxwell and Da Da Da. But it's overarchingly musically, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating album. But I want to move back to talking about the sort of political and social messages behind it. You feel it from the album. I said this to Basie when I was speaking to him, not to compare, because I'm not making a comparison in terms of the accomplishment, but to compare in terms of musical styles. His album compared to Protege's Matter of Time last year. Protege's album, it was a brilliant album, but it's extremely dark. It's kind of very brooding and very heavy, and whereas what Basie has done, and my point being, what you have done with this album, it's a very light album. It exudes positivity almost, and a kind of, while it's sending out messages, as you say, about the state of society, the state of politics, the state of living under capitalism, it's still overly positive. Was that your intention, to create something that was firstly accessible, because it is extremely accessible in terms of its music, but also that was a positive message about where we're at, but what we could be as a species and as a society? Was positivity what you were aiming for?
Well, duality is what I was aiming for. If you know anything about King Mas, and my moniker is the musical Obia Man. And when you look into African spiritual traditions, the emphasis is always on balance and keeping all of the four elements or the various elements in alignment, so that the holistic health of an individual is maintained. And so when I was creating the album, I knew that I wanted to touch on some topics that were heavy, and so I wanted to make sure that I balanced the tone so that it is. It's just like with actual medicine. If you, as a healer, sometimes in order to get someone to take a medicine which is necessary and bitter, you have to take the edge off of it a bit, and so that it wasn't so. It's not as if I'm trying to steer away from the impact, because the messages hit when they hit with heavy impact regardless. But I wanted to make sure that those who aren't necessarily drawn to that would get a chance to be exposed to it through some of the other vibes and energies that are present.
No, absolutely, and that is exactly again what you have done, because it is, as I say, it's an extremely accessible album and piece of work, and people will be drawn into the fact that it is so listenable and just so compelling, and then they'll be drawn into the underlying messages you have there. Now, the other standout thing about Crown for me was the artwork. It's stunning, what you've done, and it's a fascinatingly ingenious and also beautiful, actually, concept. You've taken one visual theme, if you like, and then you've expanded on it from incorporating each artist, which is also featured on the album, to the overriding main, if you like, main image for it. Where did this come from? Because what I'll do when we to accompany this interview, there will also be a review. My review of Crown will be going out as well, and I'll try and incorporate some of the artwork into the review so people can properly see it. But where did this come from? What was the inspiration for that, and who did it actually as well?
Well, the foundational piece in terms of the main image, which is the album cover, which includes myself and my wife, my Empress. That was done by a sister by the name of Kokab Zahoridosa out of Jamaica. So, it's really the hands of a woman that crafted the whole energy and the whole motif. So I want to big her up for setting that standard. And then once I had that panel in place, I actually had a brethren from over on this side by the name of Amadeus Underwood do a rendering of each featured artist, so that I could have those images to even extend to them as a way of thanking them for being a part of the kingdom overall and supporting the messages being put across. And it creates this almost this visual universe. It brings you into a whole a whole universe of all of these various energies, and it's a very beautiful thing.
It is, and it finishes off the album. I mean, I've been saying album throughout this. It's not an album. It's a project, really, and it finishes off the whole project beautifully. How do you feel the sort of conscious movement, particularly the revival movement that's coming out of Jamaica? How do you feel that is at the minute? Because there's quite a few artists who are delivering extremely political, social, spiritual messages through their music at the minute. How do you feel it is as a whole? Do you think it's looking good, as it were? Do you think we're seeing a resurgence in that kind of music?
I think the kingdom of reggae is in an extremely strong position. It's in very good hands, and what I love about the movement as well is, although what you could call the new roots or the reggae revival movement is making a very strong push, it's really, there is no separation from our elders. A lot of the elders in the music are very instrumental in the things that we're doing. I myself I've been counseled. The first person who ever sat me down and really gave me any counsel in this music was Max Romeo. And of course there's I've been influenced by Glenn Washington, who's also given me talks, and many ones have sat down and given us sort of the blessing from the generations prior. So we're just carrying on to honor our ancestors, honor our predecessors, and set an example for the generation to come. And I also want to give heights to the Crown Prince Dennis Emmanuel Brown and his Earth Strong, and to the entire Brown family. Heights up on yourself, in one respect.
Nice one, excellent. I'm also interested to know, there's overriding themes again throughout the album, but King and Queen feature fairly heavily in this whole notion of what, on a standard sort of system level, we would obviously call monarchy, but that is blatantly not the case in terms of when you talk about King and Queen in your album. But the King, how do you define that? What is your definition in your own spiritual place of King?
Well, within the spiritual systems of Africa, the crown, even dealing with some of the Eastern spiritual systems or whatever have you, there's the concept of the chakras and the energy centers throughout the body, and the actual crown of the body is where the highest ideations sort of come from. Whereas, the centers below the diaphragm are sort of where a lot of the anxiety and the depression and the more negative emotional states that being in third density can kind of evoke in a person. So if you're operating from below your diaphragm all the while, you're not in control of your decisions. You're operating on a base sort of instinctual level. So cultivating the inner king or the inner queen is really the way to have the full spectrum of options available to you in any moment, so that when you're in the crossroads in life, when you have decisions to make, you can see with clarity all the options that are before you, and have the discernment to know which one is leading you towards your purpose and your destiny that you would like to achieve. And speaking of which, the definition of a king is the lead single from the album, which includes myself, Randy Valentine, excellent artist, also based over your side, Jadan Blackamore, one of my spiritual brothers, Himfatic Tabs, out of Lesotho, a South African hip-hop legend, and, of course, Kabaka Pyramid. And so it's sort of a council of kings all defining, because one thing we have to be very careful of, again, in dealing with mass media is the sorts of labels and definitions that they subconsciously program into the public sphere about what is what, who is who, what values are important, what values aren't. So Marcus Garvey teaches us self-reliance, and our ancestors emphasize in the teachings that self-definition is key, because if you don't define yourself, someone else will define you. And so it's really a track that also speaks a lot about accountability, because a king is not someone who lords over people, rule by force, just give orders and people must follow.
Yeah.
But the people are who put you on your pedestal because your character is so blameless that they trust you. They are entrusting you with the governance of the kingdom, and there's a lot of accountability that goes into that. So that's the key.
Fascinating again. Just talk to me as well. Sorcery was another track that stood out for me, actually, not least musically, because again it was fascinating. You had there's the bubble pattern going on in the background, but then you kind of had the hip hop drum beat. But it was a fascinating composition. But what's the motivation, and what was the inspiration for that track? What was that about? Because like I say, it's again another one that stood out for me. It grabbed me immediately.
Well, I want to say big up to my actual blood brother, Mighty Mouse, who's producer of both songs, mind you. Definition of a King and Sorcery, same production. Mm-hmm. And it's my younger brother. He's actually up for a Grammy right now for his work on Drake's Scorpion album.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't realise that was. I've heard of Mighty Mouse. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's those are his hands. But the vision that I put forward to him definitely is because you talked about proto and how the sound is a bit dark. So when I went into the sorcery realm and went a bit later into the album, the sounds do get a little bit heavier and a bit darker. And I wanted to speak on this concept of sorcery because, again, within capitalism, almost everything becomes eventually compromised, packaged, and commodified for sale. And when that happens, there are things that people begin to notice are more marketable, and certain platitudes, things you can do, things you can say, ways you can dress, that the aesthetic of a thing begins to overtake the substance of it. And unfortunately, within Rastafari, especially within Rastafari music, there's these platitudes where people like to burn out, which is the term for condemn African spiritual traditions. It's become something that if you say it, in the average dance, you'll instantly get a forward or get a good reaction from the crowd, because this is sort of a hangover from the imposed Abrahamic religions that our ancestors were forced to operate under. And even within Rastafari, which is this sort of Pan-African, worldview, there are still these little stigmas that we have about who we are. That I see a lot of artists making these sorts of statements, and so it was something that I felt the need to address. And I want to also big up Daliana Dofo. There's a speech in the beginning by my brother Daliana Dofo, who actually has a film series called Ancestral Voices. For which I do some of the score work, and we're in partnership, and it really delineates a lot of information about what African spirituality really is, because a lot of people don't know, and so they associate it with Obia, witchcraft. I'm going to make your foot fall off, when there's, like in all things, there's duality to it, because you also know the Obia man as the bush doctor, you also know him as the healer, the physician in the community, and also the traditional psychologist, which Bob Marley told us was the Duppy Conqueror. The Duppy Conqueror is the Obia man. So I wanted to sort of balance that narrative of what sorcery is and how music, and some of the ones who consider themselves kings within music refuse to acknowledge the sources of their powers. And as long as they do that, they can never truly be a king.
No, it's really interesting commentary on that, because, again, I know from speaking to him and obviously listening to him, Kabaka Pyramid is big on the sort of African spirituality and that side of things as compared to Rastafari. So there are some artists out there who do address that, isn't there?
Absolutely, especially as the generations roll by. But even if you look into the past, there have been many ones throughout the years who have sort of broken the mold. One of the artists that comes to mind is Ella Andal of Trinidad. Even when you listen deeply to some of what Peter Tosh was saying and some of the things that they speak of, there's a strong ancestral presence. But I think in this age, we're sort of just calling it what it is, more openly. Kabaka from the Kemetic or the Egyptian side, and I focus more so on the West African, Central African spiritual viewpoint.
As a society, well, I think we're in desperate need, to be honest, of this kind of music, because politically, we're in a very unstable place around the world at the minute. I mean, you have the situation in where you are with Trump. You have Venezuela currently in absolute chaos, with the US effectively enacting a coup in that country. You have Africa's once again, the US are making moves over there. You have the Middle East is still burning. Europe is in a mess. Where I am in the UK is absolute chaos as well. And
I also want to send some energy towards Papua New Guinea, another area in the world where there's a lot of atrocities taking place, and it's very off the radar as far as the mass media.
Yeah, no, good call, absolutely. I think, as I say, I mean, it is politically and socially, it's in chaos, but also there's been a gradual degradation of society over many decades due to the systems that we're living under, due to the social hierarchies, the political hierarchies, and the overarching, the pervading influence of capitalism. And for me, we're at a sort of quite a low point, I think, at the moment. Do you think, as a species and as a planet, we are going to be able to move past this? Do you think that there is the motivation of humans to be able to do this? Because it is pretty dire at the minute. What do you think about the current situation?
Well, track 1 of the album, Round and Round, kind of speaks on this. And the sort of the resurrection of consciousness. We've been in a vortex or an age that has kind of been much about suppression. It's been about the subjugation of the human spirit, and in many regards, and also of intellect, of course. Many orders of, whether it's the Freemasons who are often maligned and seen as this, the Illuminati, and they're coming for us. But a lot of the Freemasons were the ones who actually kept knowledge and science, being perpetuated in a time where the religious institutions of the world were seeking to snuff out any sort of worldview that challenged their dominion. And as the Age of Enlightenment continues, that we move out of the Piscean Age into the Aquarian Age, on a cosmic scale, I feel as if we're really returning to a point of really shedding some of these more dense, more oppressive energies into something a lot more liberating. At the same time, it's when you look deep enough across the scale of time and space, we've been here before. These events are not necessarily new. The bread and circuses, none of it is new. These are all strategies that have been applied.
Absolutely.
Since the ancient days of the Roman Empire, and whatever have you. I just see it as the universe is kind of like a sine wave. Things sort of vacillate. It's a vibration. They go up and down, and when you reach a height, there's nowhere to go but down, and when you reach the bottom, there's nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
So as we continue to go around in these cycles, it's all about the sort of the refinement of the spirit, or the achieving more of a perfection in how you move through this plane. So I just see it as all a part of the journey and a part of the lesson. And as each of us conquers some of the more oppressive and backwards elements within our own psyche and our own consciousness, the broader cosmic consciousness will shift as well in the right direction.
It's a fascinating insight. Can I just ask you, what's your belief system? What is there any? Are you Rasta, or what do you follow as such?
I definitely cite Rastafari. On another level, I deal with traditional African spirituality. That's the main foundation of my worldview is ancestral African traditions.
That is fascinating, especially talking about moving to the age of Aquarius. I mean, as you quite rightly point out, we've been here so many times before, as you say, back to Roman Empire, but I suppose you could kind of even stretch further back than that to sort of early civilization 6,000 years ago. It is cyclic, if you like, and hopefully we will move out of this period, because it is quite unpleasant at times. Just to wrap up, I mean, what was the overarching thing that you would like people to take away from Crown? What is the overriding message that you were aiming for?
Well, I'd say in the very beginning, sort of what we just discussed, that round and round, the concept of dunya, which is beautifully expressed by Jali Phyllis Sissoko, who's actually right in your area, I believe. He stays in the UK largely, but he's from Senegal, and he's actually an amazing kora player and singer, Jali, who I believe trained with the legendary Youssou N'Dour.
Oh, okay.
So he's really, he really encompasses, he really encapsulates that message of the cyclical nature of things beautifully to the sounds of the traditional harp. And from there we go right into, the masculine and feminine balance and kind of what should be the approach for us as men, knowing that in many regards, the masculine energy has been very harmful to the planet, out of balance, and feminine energy, they talk about toxic masculinity, and it does exist. And I also would argue that toxic femininity exists. I think that any sort of energy applied unskillfully or applied in an egotistical way can be destructive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that we have to answer for, and so I'm sort of putting that example forward in terms of how we should be dealing in that realm, and then we move forward into even the realms of conspiracy theory,
Yeah,
things like flat Earth. And
yeah, I did wonder what to expect when I put that on.
yeah, and my stance on things of that nature is, we need to focus on the tangibles. We need to focus on food, shelter, water. How are we going to clothe ourselves? How do we heal ourselves? Do we know the herbs around us to keep our bodies in ideal condition as well as our mind? So when I look at two people who claim to be conscious and they are talking about this thing, and I've seen people at each other's throats, they're ready to come to blows about whether the earth is round or flat. And either way, you're not in control of your existence. Either way, you're oppressed. So it's sort of a misdirection of the frustration at the system. Yeah. When we sit and argue about these things. So that's sort of my stance on it. I don't believe the earth is flat, personally.
Just clear that up now.
Just to clear it up. But because in my ancestral tradition, it's nothing. One of the main laws is this principle of correspondence, which is the as above, so below sort of mentality. And when you look at the cosmic realm, unless you're asserting that the moon and these other planets are flat, I don't really see how that works. When I look at the trees, I don't see flat fruits. I see spheres. I see orbs all around. When I look at the cellular level of things, things just tend to appear in spheres. So that's my personal opinion, but I can't claim to know.
Obviously, listeners, I agree with him on that. Just to clear that up as well.
And then from there, you go into militant step.
That is that. Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Brilliant track. I love that. It was absolutely great. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so big up Green Lion for that too.
Wow.
And that one really deals with the principle of motion, in a sense that sometimes, especially as far as Rastafari is concerned, or consciousness is concerned, when you consider a socially conscious person, some people sort of conflate that with being pacifistic. They conflate that with being passive and neutral in how you address certain things. And again, when I look into my ancestral tradition, we have to be very careful about the whitewashing of even some of our heroes and our ancestors, because they show you, for example, let's say Mandela. They tend to show you Mandela as this, the smiling old Rainbow Nation guy from the later years, but they don't tell you, when they're educating you about Mandela, about the time he spent in the bushes training in guerrilla warfare. They don't talk to you about that.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Martin Luther King. He's painted as this total pacifist, but he wasn't. He necessarily, I actually have if you go to my SoundCloud page, this is kind of a random. I'm not trying to plug, but the speech is there on my SoundCloud, where Martin Luther King speaks on disciplined aggression. It was on an NBC interview that he did, where someone was trying to ask him if he feels as if, in the pursuit of civil rights, African Americans, or Negroes as we were called at the time, should sort of bide our time and be very calculating in how we move forward, or does he think that an aggressive approach will ultimately be beneficial or be harmful to things in the end? And he unequivocally said aggression.
Yeah.
Disciplined aggression, but aggression, because privileged classes have never, when you look at it historically and sociologically, privileged classes never relinquish their benefits without some sort of resistance.
Yes.
So it's going to take an aggressive approach in order to get things done. So that's what sort of is the spiritual energy behind militant step. There
are so many takeaways from what you've just said that I can lift off and apply to immediate situations. Your comments about toxic masculinity, but also toxic feminism. It's so true, because if it's especially the whole notion of feminism as we know it in current society, from the earlier movement from the likes of Jermaine Greer, for example. It's essentially it's a capitalist construct almost. It's not true feminism. It's not coming from the correct place. It's a construct of the system. As you say, also with militant step, that's such a crucial point, that the powers that be and those at the top of the hierarchy we live in would essentially not think twice about killing us all for their own endeavours. And again, this is why it's such an amazing album, because there are so many things that you can literally just lift out of it and apply to immediately situations today that we're living in. It is a stunning piece of work, and you should be thoroughly overjoyed with what you have achieved, because it's staggering. And I can safely say it's going to be one of the albums that's going to be on repeat for me for the next couple of months. So it's just stunning, and I would urge everyone to listen to it. And if this doesn't blow up for you, then there's seriously something is fucked with society, because I'm not joking. It should be a seriously huge album, and I really hope that people hear this and it gets recognised, and because it's not about. I understand and I appreciate it's not about commercial success, but I want people to hear this, because I'm going to need to keep listening to it to fully immerse myself in what you're saying and the messages you're getting across. But people need to hear this piece of work. It is quite, yeah. It is quite groundbreaking, so it's an absolute pleasure to listen to it, and it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you as well, King Mas. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome, Steve. I just want to say, whenever I laugh, it's mostly because I take pleasure in the delivery. It's not, I agree with the message, I take it seriously, but I find your delivery it's entertaining. I like it. Yeah.
That is a
But it's true. Yeah.
that is a compliment to me. But I would love to have you back on again, because there is loads more we could have gone into. So please, if you're free anytime, feel free to come back on to game. But for the moment, King Mas, thank you.
Yes, I give thanks, Sashi.